Bueno, raza, gente, mocto, gracias, thank you. I'm Dr. Devon Pena. Oh, and I'm going to be introduced by someone else. Thank you.
I'm right here. Kim. Yeah, very nice to meet you. Yeah. So, I'm sure, Devon, you would do an amazing job introducing yourself because you're well spoken. But I want to honor you by doing that. And we all do here at the Energy Fair. So, we are going to have a wonderful talk with Devon Pena, rebuilding solidarity in the Acequiahood, which he is a master of, from what I've learned from the panel. He founded and he's the president of the Acequia Institute, a leading advocate for indigenous agroecology and the environmental justice. A scholar, farmer, and activist, Pena has dedicated his work to preserving traditional Acequia irrigation systems and promoting sustainable farming practices in the Southwest. His efforts bridge cultural heritage and ecological resilience, empowering communities to protect their land, water, and food sovereignty. Devon will be speaking about the San Luis Food Sovereignty Initiative, which aims to improve community health outcomes in Castillo County, where diabetes and obesity rates are 2 to 3 times the state average. By reviving traditional acequia farming systems, growing healthy heritage crops, and connecting farmers and interns to the community through the San Luis People's Market as it transitions into a community food cooperative. Please join me and the entire Energy Fair crew in welcoming Devon Pena.
Thank you. Mocto, gracias. Thank you for joining me this beautiful sunny afternoon. We were driving up from San Luis this morning. It's about a 90 to 100 mile drive. And we hit some really heavy rain outside of Blanca. We had to almost stop because there was no visibility. You know, John Muir, you know that name, right? One of the things I learned from John Muir, he says, there's no such thing as bad weather. You remember that from his Sierra Nevada essays? It's a really important moment for me learning that because I faced that situation where you have to survive a blizzard in a hot spring. And he said, look, there's no such thing as bad weather, just bad attitude. And that is a very indigenous way of thinking about it, to eliminate the binary, good weather, bad weather. Okay, let me take, maybe the battery went out. Okay, the battery ran out on that one. So I really agree with John Muir. It gets rid of that good weather, bad weather. All that beautiful rain, it recharges the aquifer, feeds our riparian corridors. And you know what? That's what acequias do. And I had to fight. I don't know if you all have seen the Decode Colorado water documentary by Alan Dominguez. It just won an Emmy. I highly recommend it. Decode Colorado on water scarcity and politics. And one of the most interesting things that I am seeing happen in the discourse on Colorado water law is that the acequia is being viewed not as backward and inefficient, because you know what? Speaking of phreatophytes, which were mentioned in the earlier panel this morning, acequia systems are earthenwork ditches. And what do? They extend the hot zone of biodiversity in the upper Sonoran Desert that we co-inhabit. It's the most biodiverse life zone in the upper Sonoran. And so what acequias do is they reproduce that riparian diversity. And we're very concerned nowadays with control. But I think one of the most important lessons that acequias teach us, and I don't care whether it's the acequias in the Atlas Mountains or the zanjas in the Philippines or the acequias of the Tehuacan Valley or of the highlands of the Andes, they all have this very fundamental idea that you don't have to control water. We try to control it by channeling it into center pivot sprinklers that are computer assisted irrigation, and they even have sensors. Those are not bad ideas from a certain point of view. Well, what I like about the acequia is that it creates a microenvironment that keeps water in place. The acequia creates a watershed that's like a sponge rather than dry flash runoffs that are then impounded in reservoirs. That's a very important difference. It's like, and you think about the language of the acequia, acequia madre, the mother ditch. It's the principal ditch, right? Then you're going to have the sangria ditches, the bleeding ditches that will feed the individual melgas. You'll have the espinazo, the spinal ditch, which is in the middle and was used to irrigate both sides because it's on the center point. So even the language of the names of acequias imply a sort of bodily earth-blood relationship so that water becomes something spiritual, ecological, rather than just economic value. And yet it took us 30 plus years not only to get the Colorado Water Acequia Recognition Law passed and signed by Governor Ritter in 2003. That was us. We were very actively involved with Joe Gallegos, Gail Schwartz, former senator, and Edward Vigil, former state rep. We were the ones that brought that law into fruition. It took us a long time to do that. But the state engineers, and I think even a lot of other folks in the Division of Parks and Wildlife and so on, they viewed acequias as wasting water, that we were not very efficient. But that's only true if your obsession is with delivering a particular amount of commodity farm gate product. What I'm interested in is creating habitat for pollinators, which is why, I don't know if you can see this, we are a milkweed sanctuary in San Luis. Because of what I said earlier, we were always too poor to call it organic. We don't use pesticides or herbicides. Only recently that some of the county commissioners decide to treat willow with herbicide, but we put a stop to that. It's very dangerous. But we are, in fact, a beautiful milkweed sanctuary. And I open with this photograph. I don't know how well you can see it, but it illustrates one of the values of acequias that the state engineer's office and all of the policymakers who are concerned with water law in Colorado are starting to understand and appreciate the economic, cultural, social value of ecosystem services. These landscapes provide the basis for tourism, for agriculture, for wildlife habitat, for soil regeneration, for aquifer recharge. And what's so beautiful, if you study one of our acequia milpas, our corn, bean, and squash fields, and you measure the water quality at the head and at the end of the field, no total dissolved solids that are of any significance. It's pure, beautiful, clean water. Our water sub-irrigates by our water. Let me explain. We have about 23,000 acres of acequia irrigated farmland in Costilla County. Those are the 72 oldest water rights in the state, including the irrigation that we use, the canal, the San Luis People's Ditch, is 1852. Those 23,000 acres of acequia irrigated fields sub-irrigate 10,000 acres of wildlife habitat. In the meantime, what do center pivots do? They need to have landscape uniformity to operate. You have to homogenize. You can't do permaculture. I'm going to step back for a moment and say, maybe, because Lillian McCracken and Tom McCracken at Green Earth Organic Farms, they had a center pivot, but it was like kind of not flat. They had respected what was there already. I don't know if Tom's around. He's a good friend of mine. We've known each other since the 80s. So, but the problem with center pivots, in part, other than the fact that it's it's exceeding the recharge capacity of the unconfined aquifer. That's a very serious problem. It's causing problems meeting interstate obligations with the compact. Amber's the expert to really talk about these issues. But what I want to contrast here is that our system, first of all, in the Culebra watershed, we're the only water district in Colorado, or at least in the San Luis Valley, that doesn't have to deliver water to the interstate compact. And you might be wondering, why is that? Because we're prior to prior. That's what I like to say about Acequia water law. We're prior to prior appropriation. And it took us 30 years after we published that article when we first started, in 2003, we published an article in the Colorado Law Review, and it took us 6 years to get legislation recognizing that fact. That Acequia water law is prior to prior. But it was erased by what? Coffin versus left-hand ditch. Those of you who know water law and water history, you know what I'm referring to. Because the Coffin versus left-hand ditch decision in the 1890s decided there's only one water law true to place in Colorado, and that's prior appropriation. But that's not true. The state legislature, the territorial legislature passed 5 different laws related to acequias before Colorado became a state in 1876. And Coffin versus left-hand ditch forgot that. It erased all that territorial law history that had codified the legality of acequia water rights as a concept. And why is that important to us? Because acequia water rights don't allow you, for example, to move money uphill towards money. You can't defy the laws of gravity under acequia water law. You're not allowed to move it interbasin transfers. Water is an asset in place, and it's not meant for either commodification or exportation. That's a very important difference. There are other differences that are important. How we govern ourselves as acequias is important. And we have, under the customary law of the acequia, the principle of one irrigator, one vote. You can have 10,000 acres and I only have 1 acre, but we're both on the ditch. I have 1 vote, you have 1 vote. Even the Ditch and Reservoir Company Alliance is looking at us and saying, we like that approach because a lot of mutual aid ditches under prior are dominated by the big landowners, and they'll hog the water. We are a water democracy, 1 irrigator, 1 vote. And guess what? That's the way the San Luis People's Market operates as well, and I'm going to show you how all this fits together. But I wanted to start with water because we do have a saying in San Luis, and in fact, you've heard it all over New Mexico for many years, and at Standing Rock, you heard it. Without water, there's no life. Water is life. El agua es la vida, and that's been our slogan ever since we fought Battle Mountain Gold in the 1980s, and when we fought the Taylor family over the logging in the 1990s. All the local activists, the local farmers, and the Earth First and other environmentalists that became part of our community in the mid-1990s when we were fighting the logging, that was our slogan. Sin agua no hay paz, sin tierra, no, how's it? Sin agua no hay vida, sin tierra no hay paz. Without land, there's no peace. Without water, there's no life. And so the acequia system has to be recognized not only for its ecosystem services, including the conservation of native and wild and domesticated biodiversity, soil regeneration, wildlife habitat, wildlife movement corridors. Evapotranspiration plays a role in the local convection storms we get during the summer, at least in our watershed. All of these are ecosystem services. We also need to recognize the water democracy ethics that are associated with the acequia customary law. But I will note this, it's a messy democracy. There's a lot of tension, ego, conflict. Every ditch has a story about the guy who was killed with a shovel. Somebody hit him in the head for stealing water, for using water out of turn. It's not perfect, but it's our democracy. And I think that kind of autonomy of local self-government, dealing with the essence of life, water, is a very powerful political tool that we underutilize to organize social movements for more equality, more justice, more sustainability. I think I have a remote clicker here. You can see some of these, but that, of course, is just a land acknowledgement. The Acequia Institute, of course, we have a 181-acre farm in Viejo San Acacio, all of it under a conservation easement with Colorado Open Lands since 2012. Like I said in the earlier panel, that conservation easement includes water, so that the acequia, and also the idea that whoever takes over that farm in the future has to use acequias for irrigation rather than replacing them with pipes and, well, with center pivot sprinklers. You can use gated pipe, we do. So we're blending tradition with innovation. That's very important to us. But we are also here in Viejo San Acacio on the lands and waters of several indigenous civilizations that are still with us, including the Nochu, or the Southern Ute, the Diné, or Navajo, and the Tewa, or the Pueblo people. But what's not known about San Luis, because for a lot of complicated reasons that have to do with people trying to avoid racism, Mexicans and Genizaros, the descendants of enslaved Native Americans, became Spanish Americans. But they're not. The Spanish American part of our population was never more than about 5%. That's documented. And genome mapping of San Luis shows us that about 30% of our community are descendants of the enslaved. The Genizaros, you've probably heard that term. There's several new books about the other slavery that have been published recently that talk about the institution of slavery as it occurred here in this region. It wasn't chattel slavery. It was usually trade or captives of conflict. They were traded or they were the captives. Did you know what is the largest clan of the Diné, of the Navajo? Anyone know? The Mexican clan, 75,000 strong. Where did they come from? They were Mexicans enslaved by the Navajo. And that worked all the way. But this is the difference. They intermarried. They became integrated. They were not property. They were not chattel. It's not the same institution. But it has influenced everything about our culture in San Luis that has to be recognized, because we got to stop pretending we're Spaniards or the descendants of conquistadores. 30% Genizaro. We have indigenous people from all over Mexico and the American Southwest in our community. That's who we are. But the politics of race in New Mexico help shape identity. And people say, well, but Peña, that's the problem. You guys are always talking about identity. You know why? Because the founders talked about identity, right? To vote, you had to be white, male, and property owning. It wasn't even enough to be a white male. You had to own slaves or some other kind of property. That's the original identity politics. And all the identity politics that have existed since then are a response to that narrow constriction of what it means to be a human being. And we need to acknowledge that. By the way, every single class that I used to teach at UW or at CC, banned. Can't teach environmental justice anymore. I don't even know if agroecology would squeak in anymore. So these are problems that have shaped the culture, though. And if you look at our crops, at what we grow and how we grow them, you have to understand why we're adopting the strategy we did, which is really has 4 components to our San Luis Food Sovereignty Project. But they're all really based on 2 things. One is reviving, reawakening the cultural memory of our agricultural heritage institutions. But there are special kinds of institutions. Look, private ownership of property, that's an institution. What I'm talking about is converting our farms and our market into an institution, not of collective ownership per se, but of collective action. And this is the challenge for us because the Acequia Institute, we're not a grocery management company, right? We're not a business, we're a social movement organization. But we happen to have a lot of talented people, local people who know how to run a market. And what our role was and continues to be is to create all the assets, the common held assets, so that they can succeed at feeding their own community. Because otherwise, you're talking about a 100-mile round trip to Alamosa from San Luis. That's not sustainable. There have been a lot of challenges along the way, but the first two objectives of the project have been accomplished. We bought the San Luis, the R&R market, pardon me. The R&R market was founded by the original organizer of the Sangre de Cristo land grant as a settlement, and that was Don Dario Gallegos. He opened up the Gallegos Mercantile and ran into a lot of trouble trying to hook up to the Santa Fe Trail for the supply trains. But he managed. And then the Salazars took over, including A.A. Salazar and his son, who were very famous politicians and elites. Then it went to the Romero family, from George to Felix and his partner Claudia, who were the sixth generation running that market. So the same family, Gallegos, Salazar, Romero, ran that market for 167 years because it was founded in 1857. They were going to close it. Nobody, the heir had died. The male heir who was designated as the next generation had died. And no one wanted to take it over. New York Times did an article about 10 years ago about it. One of the oldest markets. We think actually it's the oldest neighborhood grocery in the country, based on a Yahoo News report that came out a couple of months ago. We beat Douds, D-O-U-D-S, which is 1887. We're 1857. But anyway, be that as it may. What's important is the same family ran it. There was no one available. They were going to shut it down because nobody would buy it. I consulted with one of the VPs at Natural Grocers, and when I showed him the data, he said, this is a no-brainer. You should be fine reopening running the market. What I'm proud of is not only did we buy the market building and the operation in February of 22, using a grant from the Colorado Health Foundation, a combined total of about 1.8 million. It allowed us to buy the property, put in a new roof, because forget about the roof. It was leaky everywhere. We had a huge mold problem. We had to get rid of that. We had to get rid of the asbestos. And I'm talking about asbestos that was not just it wasn't in the plaster, it was in the tile, and it was friable. It was already falling apart. I have some pictures, but you can't really see up close right now was the condition. But if you come up, you can see here, underneath the old shelves, you had entire rows of asbestos that was already crumbling. We call it friable asbestos. I don't know if you can see that very well. It was a mess. It was a toxic, dangerous mess. And we had the option of, the cheaper alternative was just seal it again. We didn't want to do that. You can see around the white and green tiles, there's blue. That's what they were doing. No, we took it out. And then we had a battle about where will it go, because we were aware of the hazards that solid waste landfills can impact communities of color. And in the end, I know it went to the western slope. I have a feeling it's out of Grand Junction in a rural area. There's a solid waste landfill there. But we lost the trail, and I'm still waiting for an answer on what happened to all of the asbestos that we removed out of the market. We didn't want it there. We thought that sealing it's a Band-Aid, that we needed to go all the way down to the foundation, which is what we did. Took us 22 months to get rid of the asbestos, lead paint, and mold. And we brought everything up to code. We invested a lot, not just in a new roof, a new. And it looks like this has given out on me again. Hello, there you are. We put in, of course, the new roof. We redid the market interior to, thank you so much, to make it not just safe and comfortable, but I don't know, how many of you will remember the old R&R? You walked in, the first thing you saw was candy and soda pop. And within a year, we had pretty much rid ourselves of about 80% of that inventory. And now, instead of half of we have a 12-door merchandiser. That's a curved merchandiser from 7-Eleven in the 1970s that we restored. New condenser, new evaporators, FRP, the whole works. Got an interesting story too, by the way, because if I had bought the shelves for that 12-door merchandiser, 26 grand for a food grade NSF certified, right? That's a lot of money. I found a woman in Pueblo who does lowriders, and she has an NSF certified dip that she can do for $2,600. So we restored the Colorado history. They were so happy. I mean, it's not that old, 1978, but they said, even that, you're even restoring that. We have a long way to go, by the way, on that, because the other interesting thing, it's easy to do this remodeling and cleanup, actually. That's the easy part of the project, so that people have a comfortable, beautiful, friendly place to go shop in and eat in. But the walls, there's 3 1857 adobe walls left. And when you go to the market, be sure to go to the back wall by the office. And we saved a little view where you can see the scorched adobe bricks from the fire in the 1940s. And then there's another one in the old hardware section where you can see on one of the walls the fire that took place in the 1890s, I believe it was. Those walls are being undermined by, to me, I didn't know this. It was very surprising to learn that those adobe walls are being undermined by how we do our road grading. Every time we repave the roads or the alleys, we bury the adobe footers. And they're now 1 to 2 feet below road level. What's going to happen? Capillary action from the water table. So we're going to have to do this major project to do structural engineering. We're doing the studies now so that we can stabilize those 3 adobe walls. We're not done yet. We're still working on the structural integrity of the building. But we have accomplished a lot. And one of our local artisan woodmakers, Rowdy Donithorn, designed, per my inspiration, I said, we need something that reflects water and mountains. So all of the woodwork is done by local artisans, including the new gondola right there on the right upper photo. And in the lower right is the 1951 donkey produce cart that we use to feature all our local crops. Right there it shows calabacita, habas, some pino nuts that were harvested locally, some zucchini, some crookneck squash, some famous San Luis peas, all local produce that we feature in our center aisle to just repeat that message. We also have a very popular meat department because we cut our own steaks, we make our own ground beef, super popular, really competitive prices because we do cut them rather than, say, even Walmart, they get them already prepackaged. This is an interesting contrast too, but our butcher is 3rd generation butcher. For, Tristan Kuhn. Richard Kuhn is his dad. He runs Kuhn's Cuts across the street from us. And it was the grandfather who had started teaching him how to dress elk and venison. Oh, and antelope too, as well as sheep and less so a cow. Until recent years, San Luis is very much a mutton place rather than a beef culture, which I have to hand it over to Lynette. She just did a cooking class with the incredible shepherd's pie I'll show you some photos in a minute of how our youth prepared that with her. So our butcher department is really popular. On the bottom left, and I really wish you could see this, it's the front of the store, and it has two coffee tables with a free coffee corner, and that's there for the elders to come and hang out, and add community interaction, because the elders can teach the youth who come in and the younger generations a lot about our community. We also have the annex, what we call the San Luis People's Market Annex. This is a beautiful passive solar building designed and built by Arnold Valdez and his colleague Burton. And it used to be a Head Start center. But when was it? In 2015? They shut down because there weren't enough youth being born in San Luis to justify running a Head Start center. It was closed until 3 years ago when Rocky Mountain SER offered it to us at a critical moment. The same month that we decided to shut down the market for asbestos and mold and lead paint mitigation, they offered us this space so that we could keep the market open. And we had food pantry events. We had some sales of bolita beans and chicos. So we were still selling groceries, a limited number of them. But we even were selling Frank's Happy Eggs from Fort Garland and Blanca. So we were doing a lot of kind of grocery-like things. But we had an opportunity. We were invited to become part of a pilot project for redesigning SNAP nutrition education in indigenous and tribal communities. So we joined organizations like Spirit of the Sun as one of the 5 groups that got 3 years of grant support to rethink how we teach nutrition education in tribal and indigenous communities. This has been a really important program because this is what we call our dirt to gut and spirit model. So our youth interns, we pay them $15 to $17 an hour to learn how to farm with acequias, how to do polyculture, corn, beans, squash, favas, lentils, which is a staple item, but it's never been grown here in the valley. We're the first ones to do it. Of course, our famous bolita beans or chicos del horno, adobe oven roasted native corn. And now with a volcanic rock cornmeal that operates out of the annex, out of the old Head Start, which is our production commercial kitchen to make masarina products like our very, very delicious tortillas. But let me go back to water for just a moment because this will segue into the rest of my talk. This is a photo on the right bottom of the historic marker to the San Luis People's Ditch, which declares it as the oldest water right in Colorado, the oldest adjudicated water right, April 10th, 1852. So, but what I find interesting about this historic marker is if you look at the bottom part of the plaque, it's the names of the people with water rights. Half of them are women. Now I want you to reflect on that for a moment. This is 1852. Half the water rights holders are women. I thought, I don't know what happened to the idea that the Mexican and the Spanish cultures are patriarchal. There's sexism, a lot of it, machismo, those things are real. But when it came to property rights, when it came to legal empowerment of women, San Luis got it right. When New England wouldn't even let women vote or inherit property, right? So think about democracy in a new way. It was San Luis that was more democratic, not New England. And we had a common also. By the way, it's not commons. It's not Boston Commons. It's Boston Common, singular. And our common land happens to be 88,000 acres. This is the largest restored common land on the planet. I have use rights. So it's a point of self-disclosure. I can go up there and harvest firewood, medicinal plants, other things like that. but half the names are women. And I think that's worth noting because to this day, who's running the market? It's all women. To this day, who are our farmer interns? Half of them are women. It's not just young men. And so I think it's very important to acknowledge the next generation of Acequia youth interns, who are interns both in terms of acequia farming methods. How do you flood irrigate without soil erosion? How do you integrate compost and biochar into acequia irrigated fields? These are all issues that we study with them and develop approaches. But we also decided, in part because of the SNAP Nutrition Education Project, what about the culinary arts? If they're growing carrots, shouldn't they learn how to prepare them as well? And shouldn't they also know that not all carrots are created equal? That most of us are not eating our great-grandmother's carrots because the soils have been so degraded? The soil rhizosphere is suffering as much as our human gut microbiomes? These are scientifically established facts. And so part of what we're teaching them is regenerate the soil. And if you do that, your nutrient density on your carrot will be higher than in a pesticide-ridden monoculture. The science backs up these statements. I'm not making this stuff up. So we're not eating our great-grandmother's carrots. But when my students grow those carrots and those peas like they did for Lynette's, look at all the work they learned to do, how to irrigate, how to cultivate. I think this is a photo. No, that's a different class. Hold on, these are all cooking classes, but I may not have put in the right photo. That the shepherd's pie, the kids loved it. We've never had a bigger hit in 3 years of cooking classes than that shepherd's pie. And I think the reason it worked so well, the youth grew the carrots and peas and the potatoes that went into making the shepherd's pie. And I also wish I could say, I wish I could have used local lamb. I can't wait to be able to do that. But I can't sell it or use it in programs like this because it's not from a USDA certified kill station. Unless they go to Westcliff. And then, we have one of our priorities is to resolve that problem for all of us here in the Valley. But the cooking and nutrition classes allow our interns to connect being in the land and understanding that the soil, as Rudolf Steiner taught us, is a living organism. It's an ecosystem. It has a microbiome of incredible life forms, billions of them in a handful of soil. So we teach them dirt. We revalue the concept of dirt, right, so that they understand how that contributes to the quality of their crops. But then what if you blanch or boil the carrots and all the nutrients are now in the soup, in the broth? And then you throw that away and keep the carrots that have been bleached of their nutrients. We teach them, When we make a beet garbanzo, no, not a garbanzo, a gazpacho. At least I didn't say Gestapo or whatever, what's her name, MRG said. the gazpacho police. Oh my God. We made a really delicious beet gazpacho. And the first thing we taught them is, after you roast the beets, and you mix them with your soup stock, all locally grown, all our own soup stock. Don't throw away the broth, because you're throwing away most of the nutrients. So what I'm saying to you is that we teach them that what you grew is very healthy and nutrient dense, but if you don't prepare it correctly, you're going to lose those advantages. So you have to learn the culinary arts. And our approach is we invite indigenous chefs from all over the country, and they work with the kids for like 3 days, harvesting, doing kitchen prep, and then the actual meal and the presentation to our EBT and community-wide eaters who come and join us. And Lynette had a wonderful class 2 weeks ago. It was about 2 weeks ago now. And we had what, about 24 eaters. We can only do about 25 to 30 dishes. We're not allowed under the SNAP rules. See, I don't know what the bureaucrats are thinking, but anyway, we can't serve you a full meal. It can only be a sampling menu, right? So, for example, instead of a plate of 2 enchiladas, we can only serve you 1 enchilada. Right? It cannot be a meal. We cannot feed the community. Isn't that weird? But that's what happened. Well, honestly, don't turn us in, but we've probably fed a lot of people with a full meal over the years. But we use this model not only to bring the youth, the next generation farmer chefs along, but also to educate people about what does it mean, and I'll use the word, it's one of those words that is now banned by the federal government, to decolonize our diets. And in the case of our region, and a lot of people are going to hate me for this, that means moderating and reducing your intake of wheat flour tortillas and burritos and increase your intake of nixtamal, corn tortillas, and all the beautiful things you can do with nixtamal. That'll help reduce diabetes. One of the things I like to serve, and this is a popular item in our cooking classes and soon to be in our deli at the market, elk and cactus tacos. Uh-huh. Con chile caribe or without, however you want, whatever salsa. We can make salsa dozens of ways. Just name it and we'll make it for you. What does that mean? Cactus, the science shows, and by the way, those have not taken off the NIH library yet, but I wouldn't be surprised if someday in the future they are. Cactus is a mucilaginous vegetation, very slow release, right? It takes a long time for your body to digest it. So it is shown to be both a diabetes therapeutic and preventative. You might even be able to reverse diabetes through the decolonizing of your diet, or what I prefer to say is re-indigenizing your diet with native crops that were part of our cultural and biological heritage in New Mexico and the rest of occupied Anahuac. So these are the lessons we're handing over to the next generation. But then there's another reality. And I don't know if I included a slide or two. And that is, how do you organize this into a co-op? You know, as hard and challenging as the asbestos, lead paint, mold removal, rebuilding of the roof, redoing of the floor, the remodeling of the building, the 400 grand or so in new refrigeration, mechanical systems, electrical, I mean, all of it. That was easy. As challenging as it was, that's the easy part. What I see every time that I see the youth congregating with the chef and see all the happy local people eating, I see that's what we have to amplify. Because I'll be honest, Generation Z or whatever, or Alpha, whatever, those, young people, younger than 30, to me they seem confused, they seem lost, and confused not in terms of what food they like or what music they listen to or how they like to hang out with their friends. And I'm not talking also about they're always looking at their phones. It's a very different kind of social interaction happens. It's one reason that we ban cell phones in the milpa, in the fields. Doesn't always work. And then I contradict myself by saying, take photos, take some video of what you're doing. I want you to self-document your learning. But what's really affecting our community, and not just San Luis, Crestone, everybody's being impacted by this. And it's not the obvious boogeyman of fascism. Yeah, that's a threat, no doubt, of course. It is the Ayn Rand ideology of selfishness and greed is good. In other words, neoliberal ethics. That's a poison that's really altered our youth. Everybody, I want to get mine. We have forgotten a very important, treasured ethical value. We have forgotten a treasured ethical value of the Indo-Hispano-Chicano community. We called it vergüenza. You ever heard that word, vergüenza? You know that word. It's a, right. This is a really core norm in Manito, New Mexican, Indo-Hispano, Chicano, Mexicano culture. To have vergüenza is good. What's bad is to be sin vergüenzas. Sin vergüenzas, to be shameless in the face of the harm that others suffer as a result of actions designed solely for personal gain. That's sin vergüenzas. It's an indictment of neoliberal ethics, but it's hundreds of years old. Sinvergüenzas has a very long moral story, a moral genealogy in our cultura. I don't have time to cover. I'm working on a piece just tracing the genealogy of sinvergüenzas. And the positive dimension, not to create a binary, but vergüenza, the ability to feel shame, because if I only act to advance my own personal needs, without regard for the impact that has on others, then I am a sinvergüenzas. I've committed an ethical violation. And I sometimes worry that this is part of a toxic mix of new ideas about what it means to be a good ancestor. People don't even think about that question anymore. Future generations. How will my actions today affect future generations? I know that keeping this market open is going to affect future generations in a positive way. I know that the current generation of staff at the market, 5 amazing, talented women, and 1 amazing male butcher, the way they manage the market as a consensus -1 democracy is working. And not only is it a workplace democracy experiment, it is also driven by the idea that the market is a communal asset. This is one of the great principles of solidarity economics, which I think is my last slide, the solidarity economy, which is, yeah, we're not against private property. I own a private farm, but I also am the administrator for a common property, and that is the Acequiahood Institute 181-acre farm. My own personal little acreage is also run as a common. And then, of course, the market becomes a common institution, a common property resource institution. So that at the end of the year, when we get our rebate from AFI out of Amarillo, and that could be $10,000, $12,000 a year, that goes for the staff to decide as an end-of-year profit share. That's a good model. Research, I remember when I was a grad student, there was a professor, can't quite remember his name right now, but he was running a research group out of Ithaca, New York. And the question was, how much does an increase or a decrease of unemployment rates affect things like domestic violence, alcoholism, death from cirrhosis of the liver? Some of you might recall these studies. They were quite old. They were started in the 60s and 70s, which is when I first heard about them as a grad student. But what the researchers found was that when you have workplace democracy, you reduce domestic violence, you reduce the rates of alcoholism, you reduce deaths from cirrhosis of the liver, therefore. You reduce all kinds of medical, health, and social maladies that are out of control right now. Let's face it, they're out of control. And so it's not enough to take care of the land and the water and heal the veggies and our own gut microbiome. We need to change our institutions of economic organization. And that's why you have the solidarity economy movement. This is the hardest part in terms of our organizing work, this is the most challenging part. Not just because of the neoliberal defections, there's plenty of those. That's a problem, but I think education patients can deal with that. But rather, the fear that people have learned from just experiencing 5, 6, 7, 8 generations of structural violence, especially the structural violence of imposed poverty, the poverty of deprivation, as Vandana Shiva calls it. And the poverty of deprivation means you've been deprived of the ability to sustain your community, to grow your own food, to protect your water, to create your own economic life and organizations. That's what we've been robbed of. It's not just that we have a rigged voting system and a very dangerous two-party paradigm. I call them the Demoblicans and Republicrats. They're not that different. They're both neoliberal. They both have billionaire owners. So we need to figure out what's the alternative. Oh, I can already see, oh, Peña's a communist. No, I'm a commonist, not a communist. There is a huge difference between common property and party, the party as state ownership of the means of production. Very, very different. The Soviet Union was never communist, by the way. I mean, they were always state-owned capitalism. But that's a different debate. So what we're trying to do is we created an endowment. I was talking to Soil Sangre about this as well, to support a zero-interest revolving loan fund for food artisans and farmers. And, well, we've got the commercial kitchen, we have land and water, we have seed, we have knowledge of how to manage soil regeneration, polycultures, all the rest. There's fear. No one wants to step up. Or very few people are willing to step up as food artisans or farmers to take out a zero-interest loan. We're going to introduce this probably loans in the range of $5,000 to $10,000 a loan. But to work, and this is the part that we're working on, you have to reawaken certain kinds of values like vergüenza, right? Because if you act sin vergüenza, as you take out a $10,000 note, then your cousin can't take out a note because you haven't been making payments on yours. It's a revolving loan fund. And that requires that you have sin vergüenzas in order to make that system work. That people, out of not wanting to feel shame, will make sure they pay their $100 that month or whatever amount they decide on so that her cousin can also have a revolving loan. And that work, let me tell you, this is really hard work because it's very much a deliberative process. It's very democratic too, but let's face it, it goes against the grain of the sort of neoliberal ethics that have distorted and twisted our normative infrastructure in communities like ours, or pretty much every community on the planet now. So I don't know how much time I have left. I don't want to go too long. Take a few questions maybe? Yes, okay. So thanks for listening. I don't know if I covered everything. There's a lot of challenges with this project. Don't ever see them as problems. Challenges are there to lead to resilient responses and adaptation. Problems, well, that's somebody else's definition of a challenge, not mine. So, yes.
Okay. Oh, it'd be good if we can use the mic because we're on live feed. So if you don't mind.
I would like to know where your market is.
We're in the oldest town in Colorado, San Luis, about 98 miles south of here on the road to Taos, New Mexico.
I'm gonna check you guys out because I gotta go back home to Taos. So.
Yeah, go down that way instead of the interstate. It's too long. If you're going to Albuquerque, say, you can go through Taos also.
And I heard you talking about going back to corn and things like that.
Yes.
I've been going back to eating a lot of amaranth and.
Yes.
And do you guys do anything with the amaranth?
Yes, we do. We've blended amaranth with corn flour to produce pastries.
Because I
And
would,
amaranth is a sacred grain that we have wild ancestor amaranth growing all over the place. We call them quelites, right? From the Mexica word, the Nahuatl word, huacalit. And yeah, no, there's a lot of hairy amaranth, also what they call, I'm forgetting the name now. Why am I forgetting that name? I just had it recently. So yes, amaranth is important. It's when I talk about the so-called three sisters, corn bean squash, I was to say three sisters plus, because it's not just corn bean squash. You have what we would call tomate and jitomate. You have amaranth. You have different kinds of wild companion plants. One of the most important ones in our milpas, in our cornfields, is verdolagas. Purslane, superfood, incredible. It's great also ecologically because it helps keep the moisture, just like wool pellets might. You keep the moisture in the soil longer because they spread out, but they don't compete with the crops because they don't show up until the corn's tall enough where it won't be bothered by the purslane at all, right? Same thing with beans and squash. So yes, amaranth is part of what I envision as a Three Sisters Plus. The other thing I think is really important to recognize that's related to your question in a way is that I'm not a nativist when it comes to what I grow. If it wasn't part of the original ethnobotany of the Mexica, I'm not going to grow it. That's silly. That's not part of how you re-indigenize cuisine and agriculture. Let me give you a good example. Lentils, lentejas. It's a staple because of the Mediterranean parts of our traditions that are in New Mexico and Colorado. Mediterranean used loosely because basically it's a Middle Eastern crop, right? It's not European in origin. And so the center of origin for lentils is part of that world that was brought here, right? Where our irrigation system is really an Arabic system. Acequia is a word derived from Arabic out of Yemen. Sakia, the one who carries the water, also means the barmaid, the one who brings you the water. Has that double entendre. But lentils are a staple in the so-called Hispano diet, no doubt, and in the Mexican diet. And yet, no one's ever grown it here in the valley. And we did. We grew it last year because we were doing an experiment with certified organic French green lentils because it's drought resistant. And our Acequia Institute farm, the Almunia de las Dos Acequias, we have an issue because the system is designed, the irrigation system is designed to support the production of alfalfa, which means in my case, our farm, we get water every 5 weeks for 5 days. You can't sustain row crops on that schedule. You can sustain alfalfa and potatoes and a few other things, but not row crops like corn, bean, squash. So we tried lentils. They love it here. But we had a problem. I couldn't get the labor together in time, and it all shattered. It's a bunch of volunteer lentil this year. But lentils is important, high protein, high fiber. It's a staple item, but it's not indigenous. And that's okay. Quinoa's not indigenous, and that's okay. Cilantro, not indigenous. I'm so glad we have cilantro in Mexican cuisine. Right? I mean, sin cilantro, pues no hay salsa. Right? So you got to consider that. So I'm not a nativist, I'm not a purist, and I think we reflect that in our cooking classes, is that we love to do fusion. And our next cooking class, which is next weekend, a chef from Guam via LA will show you what fusion means in Guam with Mexican Guam, Pacific Islander culinary arts. Try to make it to the annex on a Saturday. Next Saturday, correct, Lynette? Yeah, 1:30. It's all free. Sampling menu is served at 1:30. We start at 1:30. But our next chef is from Guam, a great fusion artist who blends together Pacific Islander and Mexican cuisines. And so that's what we're about. We're about indigenous fusion. of different indigenous foodways from around the planet because of their nutritional and medicinal value. So I don't know, I went way too long. Sorry about that.
I have a question. I really appreciated what you said about neoliberalism being such a challenge to break through and reawaken older values. Could you speak more? You said education and patience are the main ways you would break through that. How else are you finding it effective to break through that imperative?
I think this might sound silly or like a slogan or something. Show them the wonder and the joy of generosity in all you do. We don't have to pay them 17 bucks an hour to learn how to farm. They're not that good at it yet. They're not. They're actually pretty awful. But they're getting better. The more years with us, the better they get. But the point is that, one, we're valuing their labor and the fact that they're acquiring knowledge, but they're also aware they're not going to find another job like this in a long time after they go off to college and all that. And so, but we're preparing them to value their own labor and to base the value of that labor in their traditional environmental knowledge that we're sharing with them, the agroecological knowledge. And I think our generosity is recognized by them. And that's the opposite of greed and selfishness, right? So rather than lecturing, I can't give a lecture on Hayek and the Austrian Ordo liberals. All right, you know what I'm talking about? I can't do that with them. I can teach them rhizosphere stuff and mycelium and all of that, but the critique of the neoliberal ideology that came out of Austria and via the Chicago School, that's not going to work. But I know what it's about. Selfish greed, an emphasis on individual utilities, or generosity, I want my neighbor to succeed. That's a very important normative shift. And it's very post-capitalist of us. I'll use that term too. I have a friend, Cliff Atleo, a Native Canadian. He has a saying that I really agree with. He says, "There's no indigenizing capitalism." And I agree with that. Does that make me a communist? No. Now you're fitting into your own ideology because both of those are Western conquest-oriented ideologies. Not interested. But you cannot erase the thousands of little natural economies that indigenous people all over the planet have embodied and have survived and maintained until today that can provide inspiration for what's the difference between selfishness and generosity on the local level when you're trying to heal the neoliberal colonial wound. That's all I can think of. I mean, I think it works to some extent with some of the youth. Some of our youth, for example, third year, they evolved from being farmer interns. They're now workers at the market. So they're becoming part of the co-op culture. And the 5 women who run the market just love this intern, because she understands the cooperative mission. And one of the first things that we tell people, this is not just a job, it's a mission. I don't mean to sound religious about it, it's a social movement mission. I'll say it, it's an environmental justice and food justice movement. And we've had to learn very quickly how to operate as a business. But we're doing that too. We're managing it through creative energy and all the innovative things we do, like even the rotisserie. There's never been a rotisserie in Castilla County. The whole history of the county never had a turkey rotisserie operation. People love it. We can't make enough. But we also don't want to get out of control and start mass producing stuff, right? So for the youth to learn the value of their own labor, they can see that I can be a farmer, a seed saver, a plant breeder. I can be a rotisserie deli operator. You add that to the list, the skills that come into play, including how to manage the price point in a market capital. We have to adapt to that reality right now. But a lot of our food is decommodified. We don't sell it. We give it away through our cooking classes, through our demonstrations, And through our harvest, the youth always, what we had 12, 13 interns last year, they all took food to their families. They grew so many potatoes last year. All the community had our potatoes. We didn't sell a single one of them. And that's okay. Why? Because we have a nonprofit organization. We pull in a lot of assets from other sources that allow us to decouple ourselves somewhat from markets. I know that goes against the grain for a lot of what you've heard today. We are linked to the markets. In fact, we're trying to link to natural grocers so that we can have a manufacturing license to sell our good products all over the world, meaning the Front Range. We want to be able to do that. I'm not against markets. There's an old term, and I think it's what we strive for. Maybe you've heard of it, those of you with academic backgrounds, autarky. Autarky. You ever heard of that word? Autarky. To be autarkic, it means that you mainly do prosumption, producing for local consumption, prosumption. But when there's a market available, you delegate and you direct some of your product to the market, because we do need cash to pay the irrigation fees on our acequia. You know, we got to pay for that. It's a right that we have to pay for. So how do you fund that? Well, you sell some of your potatoes, right? And so it's important to understand how it's a combination of decommodified access to traditional foods for our community, as well as exploiting our relationship with the capitalist markets as they currently exist. It's almost like currently existing commons property management allows you to feed the community regardless of the price. So you bring you're not bringing money in, but you are charging hipster prices in Denver for your bolita beans. You guys want our bolita beans? $20 a pound. Locally, $7 a pound. You know, no, I mean, that's the reality of it. And there are costs involved in marketing to Denver, right? But that's part of our thinking. And the thing is, you go to Trader Joe's or Whole Foods, and they always have a social justice story when they're promoting a product. If you buy this coffee, we'll plant, shaded coffee beans and take care of the birds, that right? And whether that's working or not, we really do work that. Meaning that if you buy our bolita beans, you're literally helping us protect the ecosystem services of the acequia. You're helping us maintain the genomic diversity of our native agrobiodiversity of our crops. You're helping us sustain small farmers. And so we tell that story when we sell our bolita beans in Denver or Boulder for $20 a pound instead of $5 a pound. People will pay that because they believe in the mission that product is delivering. And I think that's one of the reasons that I like what Ms. Jones had to say about the rye project. It's very similar kind of thinking, right? And multi-uses for that product, not just as, an ingredient in whiskey or whatever. There are so many possibilities with our own products as well. Just to take masarina, our nixtamalized corn flour, tortillas, atole, tostadas, sopes, tlayudas. There's a list, I think, of about 15 different products, each different that you can make from masarina. So we're aware of that, but also taking a balanced approach between we will always have food pantry events. We will always recycle our food to prevent it from becoming part of a waste stream. How do we do that? Your zucchini is getting a little old. It's not bad. It's just people aren't used to that little squishy part over there in the corner. You cut that off, you turn it into banana bread. You sell it at a discount, at an affordable, accessible price so that everyone can have healthy zucchini bread, sweetened with our local honey or agave syrup. So one of the things we decided to do under the Colorado Health Foundation grant that started all this, no sugar, no salt. So we don't use sugar, we just don't do that. And we're also reducing the carb load and increasing the fiber load. And one of the ways we're doing that is we have a dehydrator, and we're making these beautiful little dehydrated squash and zucchini chips, and they're also so intense in flavor. Soup stock. You know, you start a soup stock, just put those little chips in there. I think I'm really out of time now, so.
We have one more question. He's
Oh.
been waiting about 15 minutes.
Oh, okay, sorry. I tend to be really long-winded in my responses, and I apologize.
Thank you very much for educating us on your history. I'm a Dakota Sioux from Minnesota, and I do documentaries. And I found that the key important thing for all of our Native people to remember is to find an ancestor long ago that you connect with your family, and it's called lineal descendancy.
Yes.
Lineal descendancy will keep us together in the future because of what the government's trying to do. You have to be quarter blood or whatever to be a Native American.
Como
But
decía, what's her name? It's blood quantum is statistical extermination
yeah, right.
of Native
And-
people.
Yes, and my wife's family is from Antonito over here. And so thank you. I just wanted to remind people, if you want to connect to your ancestor, go find a letter from long ago that shows that they're Native American, and that's called lineal descendancy. And if you connect with that letter to your ancestors long ago, that makes you a part of being a Native American through lineal descendancy, and that's key for the U.S. government to understand, because you're backed up then by proving yourself as a lineal descendant Native American through your ancestor.
That is such an important point, sir, because right now, indigenous people are being called illegal aliens. And I'm talking about the Mexican origin people, who, if you do the DNA studies of the haplogroups, Mexican Americans, so-called, 80% of the DNA, mitochondrial DNA, is directly descendant from indigenous peoples of Mexico. There are 500,000 Zapotecas living and working in California all the way up to Washington State. They're our brothers and sisters. They're not illegal aliens. They're indigenous people. And so this is why the whole question of what about the Mexican has become so important. Russell Means anticipated this when he said, hey, the Chicano, that's an ally that we need to recognize because they're indigenous. And I think that's really important. And that goes back to what I was talking about earlier, the identity politics of being Spanish American. In Colorado and New Mexico, we really need to be aware of that as well. Thank you, sir. Good question. And thank you all for putting up with me. So, till next time, gracias. Mokto.
Thank you so much.